Good morning, friends. Hello, hello. Good morning to you. Hope you're doing great on this rainy day, or at least it's threatening to rain. Certainly looks like it out there. Everybody's doing well this morning. We ready for another day. Good morning. Hope everybody's doing okay. Hello, hello. Good morning, everybody. All righty. Good morning to you. All right. Let's get going this morning. Hey, Karen, good morning to you. Good morning, everybody. Let us get going. Today is the 24th day of July at 11:11 on this Wednesday. I hope this finds you well and good and whole. When Jesus really wants to make a point, when he really wants to convey to the disciples things of great meaning and great purpose, he tells them a story. He doesn't he does he doesn't. It's not just this list of rules, although there's occasionally those. But when he really is trying to articulate to them a deep truth or something that is particularly when he's trying to articulate how the kingdom of heaven is, about how we are to be in this world so that the heavenly world may be made here and maybe find its home here. He tells a story, and so this is the parable of what is called the parable of the talents, and this is the Message translation. It's from Matthew 25. It's also the kingdom of heaven is. It's also like a man going off on an extended trip. He called his servants together and delegated responsibilities. To one he gave $5,000, to one he gave $2,000, to a third he gave $1,000, depending on their abilities. And then he left. Right off, the first servant went to work and doubled his master's investment. The second did the same, but the man with the single thousand dug a hole and carefully buried his master's money. After a long absence, the master of those three servants came back and settled up with them. The one given $5,000 showed him how he had doubled his investment, and his master commended him. Good work! You did your job well. From now on, be my partner. And the servant with 2,000 showed him how he had doubled his master's investment, and his master commended him, saying, Good work! You did your job well. Now, be my partner. And the servant given 1,000 said, Master, I know that you have high standards and you hate careless ways, and that you demanded the best and make no allowances for error. I was afraid I might disappoint you, so I found a good hiding place, secured your money, and here it is, safe and sound, down to the last cent. The master was furious. That's a terrible way to live. It's a criminal. It's criminal to live cautiously like that. If you knew I was after my best, why did you do less than the least? The least you could have done is to invest the sum with some bankers, and where at least I would have gotten a little interest. Take the 1,000, give it to the one who risked the most, and get rid of this play it safe, who won't go out on a limb or throw him into outer darkness. This story, it always, I like this Message translation because it changes kind of some of the more formal language, and it all allows us to hear it, I think, hopefully in a little different way. But it's got an edge, doesn't it? It's got a harshness to it. That this guy was just trying to keep his master's money safe. He wasn't doing anything wrong, and now he's in outer darkness, whatever that is. That sounds bad, right? So what is happening here? Again, Jesus tells these stories not to say this is what I'm going to do to you if you don't act the way that I want you to act. But he's saying the universe is such, the world is such that if we want to make a space for it to have heaven, and if we to have goodness, the true, the good, and the beautiful in it, that there are things there's a way in which to move in this world that brings that about, and there is a way in which it shuts that off. And that the master is not about that God's not about punishing us for a particular behavior, but to understand that when we contract, there's not a lot God can do with us. That actually it's hard to place blessings into a clenched fist. And so this is talking about this. And it struck me because today is the anniversary. It's the 109th anniversary of the greatest maritime disaster in U.S. history. So you can't count the Titanic. Titanic wasn't a U.S. ship. So sorry. But the greatest, or at least it boxes for the greatest, is the USS East, or the SS Eastland disaster. The Eastland, it happened. It's one of these incredibly horrible, tragic moments. And so in 1915, the newly formed Western Electric Company that was electrifying and bringing electric light and electricity to Chicago was having their field day, having their outing day for 7,000 some odd employees that they employed in Chicago. And they were going to go for a picnic across the lake in Michigan City, Indiana. And so everybody was down at the dockside bright and early at 6:30 in the morning, beginning to load a series of vessels that would take them to this picnic across the lake. And the SS Eastland was one of them. It was considered one of the fastest. It was the speed queen of Lake Michigan. That was her nickname. She was a fast ship, and so she was rated to handle 2,500 souls. So you get the sense it was a large passenger vessel. And so as they were loading folks up, the crew had to ballast out the ship a few times to get it not to develop a list, but as they finally got the last of the 2,500 souls on board, and they would throw the lines off, and she would begin to head out just a few yards off of the dock from in the middle of the Chicago River on this high day, with people pressed all around, with people excited to go on a picnic that day. She would begin to list again would not recover from the list, and would roll over and capsize and sink in the middle of the river. Just again, surrounded by other vessels, surrounded by other people. 844 souls would die that day just from being crushed, or just from being hurt, or from being drowned in what was really 20 feet of water, or not even that. We imagine our great nautical disasters to happen somewhere at sea in the middle of a typhoon, but actually the greatest of them happened just a few yards from the dock. When they investigated it, they still, even to this day, they're not quite sure what happened, but the best and most complete theory, and it was thoroughly investigated, as you might well imagine, and that was that, if you remember, it was 3 years earlier that one of the greatest maritime disasters of all time in modernity happened off of the coast of Newfoundland, the Titanic disaster. As a result of the Titanic disaster, new legislation was written that all passenger liners had to have safety equipment, and so they had to have the right number of life jackets. They had to have the right number of rings. They had to have the right number of lifeboats, because if you remember the stories of Titanic, there were not enough lifeboats for all of the complement of the people and crew, and that was and they were not violating any laws. It's simply they actually had more than was required by law on the Titanic. But however, the quickness of how the ship went down and the lack of lifeboats left resulted in the death of over 1,500 people on the Titanic. And so, as legislators would do, and as the desire was, that they sprung into action and required all of the safety equipment on new passenger liners. But the problem was that the Eastland had never been designed to carry that much safety equipment. There was no real place for it. There was no real. They didn't have davits to hang it on the side. They didn't have so much of it was all stacked on the upper and top decks. They had taken all of the safety requirements and they put it on all of the top decks, all on the superstructure, so that they would comply with the law. But what it ended up doing is making the vessel nearly unseaworthy, because they would actually go and raise the Eastland a few years later. They'd raise her out of the canal, out of the Chicago River, refit her, and she would become a U.S. Navy vessel until 1945. So even though there were issues that day, what they really discovered that it was this requirement to carry so much safety equipment that ended up leading to the death and the collapse. It's an incredibly tragic thing, but I can never help thinking about what Jesus is telling us about the kingdom of heaven in this parable and the Eastland. That if we stack ourselves with these ideas of safety, that we're going to keep ourselves safe, we're going to keep ourselves insulated from the world, we're going to make sure we have all the belts and suspenders that we need, we end up not just missing out on the voyage, but we end up actually putting ourselves in peril. There's a great quote by John Shedd, who's a famous nautical guy. He says, a ship in harbor is safe, but that's not what ships are built for. But the thing is if we look at the parable, that's not even true. That here was a ship in harbor, and fully rigged out in the safety way, and even she was not safe, because the reality is that what God calls us to is to set sail with the gifts that we have in the way in which we are made. I'm going to say it again. To set sail with the gifts that we have with the way we are made. That when we try to augment our lives with all these different safety measures and safety ways, with this great contraction, as we hear, with the third guy it's an understandable place to get there. We know how we get there, because he was given 1,000 according to his ability, meaning he wasn't the head of the class. And he knows he's not the head of the class. That in this parable. And yet in the parable, what happens? Because it's not in those places where we think we're crushing it, where we're really sharp, where we know what we're doing, where we need to where we kind of stack up all the safety equipment. No, it's in the great disasters that gives us the law, that gives us the requirements to do all the things that eventually could actually put us in peril. It's in the tragedies of our life, in the traumas of our life, that if we navigate just by those, if we legislate everything through the traumas, if we make all of our rules about what we're going to do, about the fact that we one day may have been hit by a car, we may have one day had something bad happen to us. If everything goes through that lens, nothing moves, and that's the great tragedy of this. That it doesn't matter that we get it all right. It doesn't even matter that we get a lot of things wrong. What it matters is that we set sail with the gifts that we have and the way in which we are made. If God gives us something, as the parable tells us, if God gives us something, He gives it to us not to keep. He gives it to us to let it flow through us and to give it as a gift to the world. If you are made as the fastest, as the speed queen of Lake Michigan, you are to be the speed queen of Lake Michigan. And that stacking all kinds of safety stuff on top of her only left people in peril. Stacking all kinds of ideas of safety on top of your life. And, if you don't sing the song, nobody will ever make fun of you. If you don't say the words to your beloved that terrify you, you'll never be mocked or rejected. If you don't strike out in profession, if you don't strike out in life, if you don't set sail, nothing will ever happen. But that's exactly it. Nothing will ever happen. And it's not that God wants to throw us into outer darkness. It is that's where that our lives end up just as dark, just as bereft as they would when as the coins and the money that the third person in the parable buried in the ground. If God gives you something, use it. That's what it's for. It's never just for our benefit. But it's for us to work with and to multiply. The great investor, kind of savant, Robert Kiyosaki, he says the biggest risk a person can take is to do nothing. Kiyosaki is simply taking this biblical principle that Jesus gives us in Matthew, that I think plays itself out in the tragedy of the Eastland, who, for all the right reasons, just like our little third person in the parable, for all the right reasons, is trying to keep the ship safe, trying to keep the master's money safe, and yet ends up in peril, ends up in darkness, ends up in going to 844 funerals. Friends, my hope for you is that you will look at the things that God has given you in your life. You will look at your little ship and your little vessel. You will look in the way that God has designed you and made you, and that you will set sail. And that when you step, that you will not overburden yourselves with an abundance of caution, but tell those whom you love that you love them. Spend the time, the talent, and the treasures that God has given you on the bringing the true, the good, and the beautiful into the world. That you'll invest. Maybe it's in yourself, maybe it's in others, but you'll invest. You will spend it. Because the great and grandest adventure is the adventure that happens. Not the adventure that could have, not the one that might have, not the one that safely returns that which we have been given unmarked and unmade and unmarred back to its maker. Friends, God has given us capital to spend every day in the hours and the seconds and the minutes we've been given. God has given us capital every day in the inspirations of our heart and the wonders of our being and the intellect of our mind and the strength of our hands and the intentions of our being. Spend them. Invest them. Invest them in the people around you. Invest them in the life that you've been given. Invest them so that they may be doubled and that you may be a partner with God in the recreation of the world. Because that's what we really are. And that's what God calls us to be. And that is how heaven comes into our lives. All right. Peace and grace to you, my friends. It is so glad and thankful you are with us today. We will pick it up tomorrow with another 11:11.